I was the one who signed the lease on our loft. The one who wired payroll when the bank's portal glitched at midnight. The one who sat in hospital waiting rooms while his mother slept and his father forgot our names. So when Adrian looked at me across the boardroom table, in front of investors, and said, "You no longer belong here," I felt the world split with a sound I could hear, but could not place like ice breaking on a river you thought was safe. My name is Mara. I'm 38, a strategist by trade, a builder by temperament, and for the last 12 years I have been co-architect of a company and a life that now pretends I was only ever a guest. The part that sticks under my skin isn't the sentence, it's how softly he said it. Like mercy. Like he was walking a dog to the end of the block and telling it to sit. Our investors watched him. Not me. The glass walls mirrored their expressions back at me, bored curiosity. A few raised brows. One sympathetic frown, already curdling into avoidance. Adrian's tie, a slate blue I had picked out for him the day we pitched our first seed round, was knotted perfectly. He didn't look cruel. He looked clean. I didn't speak at first. You don't argue with a sudden storm. You take inventory. The pitch deck I had prepared lay closed on the table. The tabs in it color-coded the way I'd always done since grad school. Under the table, my hands were steady, as if some old part of me refused to tremble in front of people who would call it drama. Everything smelled like varnish and citrus cleaner. "This isn't how we do this," I said finally, because it was the smallest truth that would fit my mouth. He didn't flinch. "It's already done," he said, and a junior partner slid a folder toward me, as if mercy could be stapled. He had chosen his timing with care. The acquisition term sheet had landed that morning, 8 figures on paper. The kind of validation that makes even good people lie to themselves about what they're willing to excuse. We were supposed to celebrate tonight at a place with white tablecloths and the kind of piano you don't request songs on. Instead, he was dismantling the scaffolding of my life in daylight so clean, it made the air taste metallic. A board vote, I asked. Minitus causa. Adrian, you need cause. He tilted his head the way he does when he's pretending to listen. Irreconcilable differences in vision, he said, as if he were emptying a dish of used matches. It was the kind of sentence that lets men sleep. Denise, yes. There was a Denise in my life too, but she wasn't his sister. She was his shadow, our operations director, the one who called me brilliant to my face and too emotional in rooms where I was not invited. She stood just over his right shoulder, arms folded, the corner of her mouth shaped like patience. I remembered when she joined, 3 years in, how she asked for my notes to get up to speed and then quoted them back to me as if they were her ideas. People like Denise fold themselves into your routines like a soft detergent, and then one day the shirt smells like them. I opened the folder with the neat, precise hands I use when handling glass. A separation agreement. No equity acceleration. No retention bonus. A non-disparagement clause with teeth. The explanation read like a horoscope written by a litigator. Your talents were important in the early stage. The company's needs have evolved. This transition, though difficult, is in the best interest of all stakeholders. My mouth was dry. You want me to leave with a laptop sleeve and my dignity, I said. My voice steady only because I had already practiced not shaking. I want you to leave with your head high, he answered, as if he were granting me height. Behind the glass, the city did not care. In Chicago, the river keeps running even when you fall in. I gathered my things with care. Not because I needed them, but because I wanted him to watch me do it without breaking anything. The executive assistant suite. Overworked, never paid enough to hold anyone's shame, had already placed my personal items in a box. The tea mug with the hairline crack. The framed photo of my mother and me in front of a library. The fountain pen Adrian gave me when we closed our Series A. I picked up the pen and weighed it in my palm. Metal has a memory. It knows which hand has warmed it, which signatures it carried. I left it on the table. When I reached the door, he called my name, as if he were the one being abandoned. Mara, he said. That soft mercy again. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I turned. I wanted to say the truest thing, that hard things do not measure themselves. People do. Instead, I nodded once in the way that lets men believe they are still the ones instructing the air. Then I left. The hallway smelled like printer toner and coffee. A few faces turned toward me, and then away, practicing their deniability. I took the stairs. On the landing between floors, I sat with the box by my feet and allowed the present to catch up with me. My phone buzzed, and I let it buzz. I counted the breaths between the elevator dings and thought about all the small specificities that hold a life together, the way Adrian used to text me his worst ideas at 2 a.m. because he trusted me to be kind and precise. The way my mother keeps a shoebox of my debate trophies under her bed because she insists the past can still be polished. The way I have, for years, written everything important in a notebook before typing it because handwriting is slower and therefore closer to the truth. I called Eli. Every woman who has survived a man's gentle cruelty has an Eli in her phone. He is my attorney. My friend from the years when we worked out of a coffee shop with wobbly tables. He answered on the second ring. "Tell me you're calling to say you got the valuation you deserved," he said. He cut me out. I said. There was a silence on the line that reminded me of the kind of quiet that lasts just before a storm touches ground. "Where are you?" he asked. "The stairwell," I said. 2 flights down from the boardroom where my life used to be. "Good," he said. "Stay there. Breathe. Read nothing. Sign nothing. Send me a photo of whatever they handed you. Then go home." Home. I said it like a question because I was suddenly unsure where that was. I took the photos. The clauses gleamed like surgical instruments. Eli's reply arrived fast, as if he had been waiting years to say it. "This is adorable," he wrote. "Come to my office in 2 hours. Bring nothing else." The air in the stairwell felt less hostile. I stood, shouldered the box, and descended into the part of my life that was not curated for public spectacle. On the street, the wind lifted my hair, and the city resumed its argument with itself. I passed the bakery where we had celebrated our first customers with almond croissants. The same baker waved. I waved back and pretended the window glass between us was the only barrier. At a crosswalk, I looked up and saw our logo on a bus stop ad, the tagline I wrote on a napkin during a train delay. The colors I insisted would feel like kindness in a market that sold conquest. A stranger stood in front of it, scrolling their phone, oblivious to the way my heart recognized a place it could no longer live. I did not go home. I went to the lake. Water is the opposite of a contract. It pulls at you with no promises. I sat on a cold bench and let ordinary things reassert themselves, the intake of breath before a cyclist passes, the metal shriek of a train bending into a turn, a dog's sudden joyous bark, as if the world had just been invented. I thought about the beginning, because beginnings ask to be honored even when endings behave like thieves. Adrian and I met in an empty classroom after hours when we both came to borrow the same whiteboard. I remember the squeak of the pen when he drew his first impossible diagram. He was beautiful in the way people are when they still believe their hunger is a virtue. He talked fast, and I could hear that he wanted to make something that mattered. I was foolish enough to think wanting was enough. We started the company with a table, 2 laptops, and a debt we called faith. I ran operations from my kitchen table, wrote the first policy manual, compiled compliance checklists at 3 a.m., while he slept face down in spreadsheets. I learned his tells the way he never touched the last bite of anything on a plate, because leaving something behind made him feel generous. The way he used silence as a leash in meetings, and then mistook people's obedience for respect. Trust breaks in increments. The first time he took credit for my idea, I explained it away because the truth was too sharp to swallow. The 5th time, I found a way to make the story symmetrical so that I didn't have to feel foolish for still believing the version of us that we performed for investors. There were nights he came home and kissed me on the forehead, like a father blessing a child. There were mornings he watched me tie my hair back before a pitch and said, "You're perfect," like a prayer he didn't believe in, but liked the sound of. It is important to be honest about the good, not because it cancels the harm, but because it explains the length of the leash. We laughed. Often. He could make me feel clever without trying. And it is dangerous to love the version of yourself someone else reflects. We wrote our founding principles on index cards and pinned them to the corkboard by the door. People before product. Integrity over immediacy. Make what you'd give your sister. Today, those cards might as well be fossils. Paper remembers even when men decide not to. At Eli's office, the receptionist gave me a glass of water and a look I recognized as solidarity disguised as professionalism. Eli came out with his sleeves rolled and that grin he gets when someone has underestimated the wrong woman. He took the folder, skimmed, and snorted. They always think the polite language will anesthetize the knife. He said, "They want the press release version of theft." He looked up at me. "You're not going to like this next part, because it will feel like anatomy instead of empathy. But I need the muscle and bone. Did you ever sign a repricing on your vesting schedule?" "No," I said. I negotiated mine myself. 4-year vest with a 1-year cliff. I'm 3 months from full vest. He nodded. "Did you sign any right of first refusal waivers in the last round? Only for secondary shares we never executed." "Good," he said, already scribbling numbers on a legal pad. "Do you have a copy of the founder's agreement?" The first one before counsel polished it. "In my email," I said. "In my notebook," I added, because of course it was there. Written in my hand. The week we moved into the co-working space that smelled like ambition and somebody's salad dressing. "Bring me the notebook," he said. "If what I remember from those early nights is right, there's language in there. Adrian never made counsel excise because he thought it was sentimental. You wrote it. He wanted to keep it as a talisman. Founders write dangerous poetry when they're young. Sometimes they sign it." His eyes lifted to meet mine. "Mara, you might already have the thing men call a miracle, and lawyers call a contract." We pulled the notebook out of my bag like a relic. The cardboard cover had softened at the corners. On the first page I had written us into existence. On the third, in neat black ink, were clauses Eli could recite by heart because he'd watched me write them at 111A. M. The time the building's old radiators made their loudest complaint. Clause 3. 2. B. Said this in the event of any acquisition, merger, or material liquidity event. Founder equity and IP contributions shall be treated as indivisible until such time as both founding signatures are present on any binding document of transfer, so that neither founder may convey, encumber, or reclassify the other's contributed assets or compensation without mutual assent. There were other words around it, idealism and promise, and the particular romanticism of two people believing they were the only honest ones, but that sentence was a steel beam in the sentimental frame. Eli sat back, a slow smile moving through him like a tide. "There it is," he said. "He can tell a room you no longer belong here. He cannot without your signature sell what you built, or exclude your share from any payout tied to your IP and contributions. If he signs a term sheet that behaves as if he can, that document hums with fraud." My throat went tight. Not because I was saved women don't let themselves believe that cleanly, but because the words I had written years ago when we were kind to each other had turned into armor for a version of me I hadn't met yet. "It's handwritten," I said, as if the ink could invalidate itself. "It's dated and countersigned," Eli said, tapping Adrian's signature, that elaborate flourish he practiced like a teenager practicing a band logo. "We'll cross-reference it with emails from that week. You'll search your inbox for mutual assent and indivisible. You like repeating phrases, they leave trails." He drafted a hold letter. He called it a courtesy. It wasn't. It was a line of fire drawn on clean paper. We sent it to Adrian's counsel and the board, attaching the scanned page and the early-stage email where Adrian had written, "I love that line about indivisible. It keeps us honest," followed by a heart emoji he never would have used in daylight. Eli summarized the situation in a paragraph that tasted like steel. "Any attempt to proceed with diligence or execution of a transaction without my client's written assent will be considered a knowing violation of the founder's agreement and a tortious interference with her economic expectancies." He sent it. We watched the little paper airplane icon leave the screen. Sometimes revenge is just insisting the record keep its memory. I didn't cry. Not because I'm strong, but because the body has rules about when it permits itself water. Instead, I told him the truth that made my jaw ache. He will say I'm making this emotional. He will say we talked about me stepping back, that I agreed in principle to a transition, that all that remains is my refusal to let go. Eli nodded. So we will not argue feelings, he said. We will argue math. Your hours, your drafts, your commits, your patents, your customer contracts signed by your hand, your narratives and investor memos, your design choices that are not aesthetic but functional. Will show that removing you is not a question of chemistry, it's an erasure of labor. Erasure is not a legal theory, but the ledger knows. He asked for the story. The whole of it. The parts that people tend to compress into a single sentence because they are tired of hearing themselves justify the shape of their lives. I told him about the long winter we almost folded, and how I sold my car to float payroll because I could not bear to call the staff family and then ask them to carry what we could not. I told him about Adrian's father dying, the quiet devastation of a man who never learned how to grieve without breaking expensive things. I told him the way Denise had begun showing up to investor dinners uninvited, and the way Adrian's laugh changed when she was around a shade of admiration he used to save for me after we won something hard. Eli didn't interrupt. He wrote names and dates and verbs, and when I finished, he looked like a man checking the last bolt on a bridge. Go home, he said finally. Do not answer his calls. Do not talk to anyone who says they just want your side. Your side belongs to paper now. Eat something salty. Take a walk where the city can prove it is bigger than this room. What if he moves fast? I asked. What if he signs something tonight? Eli's smile had no kindness in it, and that made me love him. Then he walks into a trap you set for him 5 years ago when you believed in the best version of him, he said. And we will teach him, gently and completely. That belief is not the same as surrender. I left with copies and a list. On the train, I watched our stop pass by and let it go. I got off 2 stations later and walked into a neighborhood where no one knew my name. A dog barked at a squirrel as if the squirrel were a moral failing. A child in a red coat explained gravity to her mother by dropping her snack. The sky over the lake went bruised purple and then, as if it were considering forgiveness, briefly pink. My phone buzzed with messages I did not open. There were 3 from our PR firm. 2. From a journalist I had given exactly 1 quote to a lifetime ago. 1 from my mother that said, "Only call when you can." And a heart I recognized as her way of not panicking. Adrian's name pulsed on the screen, and I let it ring until the sound felt like a metronome marking a tempo that no longer belonged to me. At home, the loft remembered me. Dust floating in a late afternoon beam looked like snow in a storybook that refuses to be honest about cold. I took off my shoes and lined them up. People underestimate the ritual power of shoes facing the same direction. I opened the notebook again and read the words I had written to a man I thought was my future. We build with both hands or not at all. The sentence was earnest as a school pledge. It was also a trapdoor. At midnight, Eli texted. They responded. Polite bluster. Counsel says they'll continue to evaluate options and asserts your clause is aspirational and subordinate to later agreements. Their letter does not attach any later agreement. Also, funny thing, Adrian forwarded our letter to the acquirer without redacting anything. We know their counsel now. They're not stupid. They will not close without you. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the sound made the room feel occupied by someone who had not yet been broken. The next morning, my mother called again and I answered. She has the kind of voice that makes you think of wooden spoons and the first snow day. Is it true? She asked. I told her the version that did not require her to learn the word indemnification. She listened as if each sentence were a glass she washed and set carefully on a towel. When you were little, she said when I had finished, you used to keep your crayons in color families and then share them with kids who didn't have any. You cried once because a boy snapped your favorite green in half and you said you would never forgive him, and the next day you taped it back together and gave it to him anyway because he was drawing trees. I hope you don't do that this time. Tape it, I said. Give it back, she said. I showered and chose a black dress and the blazer with the inside pocket, where I keep things I am not ready to lose. I braided my hair back because I do my best work when nothing touches my face. I ate toast and an apple, and they tasted like adulthood. At 9, Eli called. "I need you to come in," he said. "Bring the original notebook. And, Mara, be ready. We're going to send a second letter. Not fire. Geometry." "What does that mean?" I asked. "We're going to draw lines the other side cannot cross without tripping their own alarms," he said. "We'll be kind. We'll be precise. We will remind them that decency is cheaper than litigation." On the walk to his office, the city performed itself with confidence, a bus groaning into the stop like an old comedian hitting his mark. Construction workers laughing about something that sounded like a dare. A violinist on the corner playing a song I recognized from a movie about survival. I caught my reflection in a shop window and almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked damaged, but because I looked unafraid of being seen alone. Adrian called again. This time I answered and said nothing. He filled the silence with the voice he uses on stages. "Mara," he began, as if we were still partners solving a late problem with early grace. "Let's not escalate this. The board is open to offering you a generous severance." "Severance," I repeated, trying the word on and finding it shapeless. "I built this," I said, "with you. I am not requesting alms. I am insisting on math." He sighed the way men sigh when women start measuring. "Don't do this," he said, finally honest for a heartbeat. "You'll ruin the deal. Deals that require erasing their co-authors ruin themselves," I said, and ended the call because an ending is a skill. When I reached Eli's office, he had already printed their response and highlighted the places where the pros thought it was law. He slid a new letter across the table, calm, almost gentle. It cited the clause, attached 3 emails, and then did something I had not expected. It invited them to do the right thing. "We propose a resolution that honors both founders' contributions." It read, "Recognize Ms. Hale's equity and IP rights in full, include her as signatory on all final transaction documents, and engage in good faith discussions concerning her role in any post-transaction transition. Otherwise, please consider this letter. Notice that any attempt to proceed without Miss Tardy, Hale's assent will trigger immediate protective actions, including but not limited to emergency injunctive relief." It was not a threat, it was a map. We sent it at 9:27 a.m. at 1003. My phone lit with a number I didn't recognize. The Acquirers Council. I let it ring twice and answered on the third, like someone not in a hurry. The voice was measured and almost kind. "Ms. Hale," she said, "I've read your counsel's letter and the attached documents. We will not proceed without your signature. We would like to meet." I wrote the words on a yellow sticky note because I wanted to see them in a color that had never lied to me. Eli smiled. "That," he said, "is the sound a trap makes when it realizes it is empty." Outside, the day warmed a degree. It felt like the smallest possible reprieve, and I took it. On the sidewalk, I stopped at a flower stand and bought white peonies because they opened slowly and refused to hurry for anyone. I carried them home like a promise I had written to myself and finally remembered to keep. When I woke the next morning, the peonies on the kitchen counter had opened halfway white petals, cupping small golden centers like they were listening. I brewed coffee and watched the lake light bend across the floor. The world had not changed its shape, but it no longer tilted toward him. Eli texted first board meeting at 10. "They're rattled. Keep phone nearby." I wrote back, "Ready." The word surprised me. Ready for what? For justice? Maybe. Or for the long, dull hours where justice looks like paperwork. At 10:30, my phone buzzed again. It was a number from the firm that had just offered to buy our company. "Ms. Hale, this is Nora Lang, lead counsel for Horizon," the woman said. Her tone was careful, professional, a step slower than neutrality. "We've reviewed the founding documents you provided. Our due diligence team confirmed the clause you referenced. We'd like to ensure any future correspondence includes you as signatory Byerley." I wrote her email down on a sticky note, the same way I had written every goal in those first years, small, square, portable victories. After the call, I went for a walk along the river. People hurried past me. coats flapping like broken sails, unaware that a revolution could hide inside something as boring as a clause. When I returned, 3 missed calls blinked on my screen, all from Adrian. The voicemail began with a breath that almost sounded like apology. Mara. They froze the diligence process. Investors are panicking. I need to talk to you. Please don't do this to everything we built. Everything we built. The pronoun landed like a cough in the wrong throat. I didn't delete it. I saved it in a folder labeled Evidence. That afternoon, Eli and I met in a cafe across from the courthouse because we both liked irony, served with caffeine. He slid a folder toward me, copies of the board correspondence. Time-stamped proof that Adrian had tried to sign without me. He used your electronic signature macro. Eli said, Laze. It leaves a trace. I stared at the printouts. So he forged my consent. Technically, he borrowed it. Eli said dryly. Practically, it's fraud. The next steps unfolded like choreography, filing a notice of injunction, sending cease and desist letters, watching the same men who once called me indispensable, now copy lawyers instead of replying to my name. Each email carried the same brittle politeness, proof that civility is often just fear in a better suit. By dusk, the first article hit the business wires. Founder dispute stalls Horizon acquisition. The journalist quoted sources close to the matter describing creative differences and contractual ambiguities. I laughed out loud. Ambiguity had never been my problem. Men simply disliked what clarity cost them. At 9, my doorbell rang. I saw his reflection through the glass panel before I heard his voice. Mara. Please, Adrian said. We can fix this privately. You should talk to my attorney. I replied, just loud enough for the building's hallway camera to catch it. I'm not the villain you think I am. You're not thinking at all, I said, and closed the door. Later. Ali called. He showed up. Yes. Good. Now he knows you're not hiding. The peonies had opened fully by the time I sat back down at the kitchen table. I wrote the date in my notebook, and beneath it a single line, power is the moment you stop asking to be understood. The city outside pulsed with light, and for the first time in weeks, I slept. By the time the acquirer's lawyers agreed to a joint meeting, the story had already slipped beyond boardroom walls. Reporters called it a power struggle. But for me, it was anatomy again, muscle memory. Not spectacle. The conference room on the 42nd floor looked exactly like the one where Adrian had dismissed me. Same glass. Same skyline. Only the seating changed. Ali sat beside me, Adrian across, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked like they'd been trained to smile with only their eyes. Nora Lang from Horizon began softly. We appreciate both founders attending. Our objective is clarity. Eli's voice was silk wrapped around wire. Clarity is precisely what my client has been requesting. He handed over a copy of the handwritten clause. Magnified and notarized. Original ink. He added. Adrian's counsel skimmed. Expression. Unreadable. Adrian himself stared at me. Not at the paper. You're really going to destroy everything because of a line in an old notebook. I met his gaze. I'm preserving what that line meant before you decided it was optional. The meeting became procedural dates. Percentages. Valuations. Each word was a brick in a wall that slowly built itself between us. When it ended, Horizon's team stood and shook hands with both of us. We'll reconvene after internal review, Nora said. Her handshake lingered a fraction longer on mine. You wrote something elegant, Miss Hale. Outside, the air tasted of iron and rain. Eli walked beside me. They'll settle, he said. They can't afford delay. And Adrian, he'll have to choose between his pride and his payday. 2 days later, he chose wrong. The email came at 2 a.m. Forwarded from Eli. Adrian had tried to close with a shadow buyer. The attempt triggered automatic alerts from Horizon's compliance system. It was over before sunrise. By noon, the board had voted to suspend him, pending investigation. I didn't celebrate. I made tea and opened my notebook instead. writing the sentence that had saved me one more time. Slower now, like reciting a prayer. At dusk, my mother called. "Is it done?" she asked. "Almost," I said. "Then breathe before you start building again." The following week, Horizon's counsel offered a new contract. My name appeared first. Not last. The clause remained intact. Eli read it twice and said, "It's clean." When Adrian requested a final meeting, I agreed not for closure, but for truth's inventory. We met in the same cafe where we once pitched our first investor. He looked smaller somehow. Or maybe I'd finally measured him accurately. "You win," he said. "No," I answered. "I remember." He opened his mouth to speak, but I stood before he could. "I'll keep what I built," I said. "The rest is yours to regret." I left him there, surrounded by the echoes of promises he never kept. Outside, the wind off the lake carried the faint smell of rain and exhaust the scent of cities that never apologize. At home, I set the final contract beside the vase of peonies. Their petals had begun to fade at the edges, translucent but still beautiful. I wrote a single sentence under today's date. "Justice isn't revenge, it's remembering out loud." I looked out at the skyline that had once framed my humiliation and now held my freedom. "Thank you for watching," I whispered to no one, imagining the voiceover that would follow. If you've ever been erased, rebuild louder. Like, share, and tell your story until the world learns your name. The city never really sleeps. It only changes its rhythm. In the weeks that followed, mine began to sync with that pulse again, steady, awake, no longer gasping. The headlines shifted from founder dispute to amicable resolution, a phrase journalists use when they can't decide whether something is victory or surrender. Horizon's deal went through quietly. The valuation held. My name appeared on every document exactly once more than Adrian's before his. It wasn't triumph. I felt signing the final page it was reclamation, the sensation of something clicking back into its rightful slot. Eli closed the folder and leaned back. "You're free," he said. I smiled. "No, Eli. I'm responsible." Freedom, I had learned, was not escape, it was ownership. That evening, I returned to the office building, not for nostalgia, but to collect the last of what was mine. The security guard nodded as if I'd never left. Inside, the walls hummed with fluorescent indifference. The company logo still shone on the glass. Letters I had drawn by hand before a designer digitized them into perfection. Denise was there, packing her desk into silence. She glanced up when she saw me, and something that might have been guilt flickered across her face. "You got everything you wanted," she said. "Not everything," I answered. "Just what was fair." She hesitated. "He's not taking it well." "I know," I said. "He never learned to lose quietly." I didn't add that losing quietly had been my education. When I reached my old office, the air smelled of toner and faint perfume, the ghost of my own presence. On the window ledge, someone had left a mug, "World's Best Co-Founder." I almost laughed. I placed it in my box, not as a trophy, but as an artifact of misplaced faith. Outside, night stretched over Chicago like a dark silk sheet. My reflection in the glass looked older, sharper. For the first time in years, I didn't see someone apologizing for her ambition. The next morning, Adrian's lawyer called to confirm the transfer of funds. "Mr. Vale has signed everything," she said. "He asked me to convey that he hopes you'll find peace." "Peace is overrated," I replied. "I prefer precision." After the wire cleared, I walked along the lakefront, the wind cutting clean lines across the water. I thought about beginnings again, two people borrowing a whiteboard, a shared hunger, a dream that forgot who fed it. Betrayal, I realized, isn't the opposite of love. It's what happens when love refuses to evolve. I used a portion of the settlement to start something small, consulting for women founders navigating the exact traps I'd fallen into. I called it Indivisible, after the clause that had saved me, The logo was a single, continuous line forming two hands clasped. At the launch event, Eli raised a glass. To the woman who wrote her own rescue, he said. To the friend who made it legible, I answered. Applause rippled. Cameras flashed. But behind every flash, I saw other faces, women in stairwells, in late meetings, in the quiet after being told you no longer belong here. For them, I spoke clearly into the mic. Sometimes they'll tell you your signature doesn't matter. Sometimes they'll steal your handwriting and call it progress. Don't let them. Paper remembers. And so should you. The crowd rose, not in noise but in recognition. Later that night, alone again, I placed the original notebook back into its box. The ink had faded slightly at the edges, but the sentence still stood firm. Neither founder may convey, encumber, or reclassify the other's contribution without mutual assent. I touched the words the way people touch scars, proof of healing, not hurt. Before turning off the lights, I typed the final update for our followers. He took everything I built, but in the fine print, I'd already written my return. The post went viral overnight. Thousands of comments, stories, confessions. A tide of voices too long kept silent. When morning came, I stood by the window with coffee. The skyline reflected in the glass. Somewhere out there, Adrian was learning what accountability felt like when it wore my name. I hoped he remembered that I once wished him well. Justice had not made me bitter, it had made me fluent. I looked at the light crawling up the lake, gold on gray water, and whispered to the world that would never hear enough of women like me. If you ever lose everything, start again with your own handwriting. If my story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about courage, truth, and rebuilding after betrayal. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done?